I live in a small town built in bushland, where a lot of elderly people reside, so it's safe to say that it's always been a safe neighborhood, and I've never needed to be overly cautious. This is probably why I had often been naive enough to believe that although there is a small possibility of something bad happening to me, I thought it was far too unlikely. At the time, I was 15 years old, and I used to go out on weekends to visit my boyfriend at the time, who lived quite a while away from me. I wasn't able to drive at this age, so public transport was my only means of going over to visit him. This meant walking about 20 minutes from my house to a bus stop, catching the bus into the city, and then catching a train to his house. I was used to doing the same trip every week, and I felt safe taking the trip by myself. As I was only able to see him one day during the week, I would leave early in the morning to get there and stay until fairly late enough before going home. Because it was late by the time I left my boyfriend's house and public transport was less frequent at that hour, it would be a waste of time for my boyfriend to travel any of the way back home with me. So every week I made the trip back home alone. On one particular night after visiting my boyfriend, it was the usual ride on the train back into the city, and I was waiting at the bus station. The bus station is a large open building above a number of platforms on a lower story where the buses would pull in. I was waiting on the upper story on a bench in front of the stairs that led to the platform I needed for my bus home. I don't recall there being many people around, maybe one or two people passing by, but it was essentially deserted because of the late hour. On a side note, because I was visiting my boyfriend, I dressed up to look pretty for him. I was wearing a decent casual dress. I had straightened my long hair so that it looked neat, and I had just recently received some high platform boots for my birthday, which I thought looked super cool, and they were fun to wear because I didn't feel so short. I was ruffling through my bag for some gum, and I noticed someone sit down next to me on the bench. Usually when someone sits on a bench which is already occupied, they leave a sort of one-person gap between. But this person sat down right beside me, despite there being a whole bench available. When I looked up from my bag, I saw a man who was maybe 30 years old. I'm a terrible judge of age, so I'm not really sure. I don't remember too much about his appearance. I think he was bald or had short hair. Being naive, I didn't think to try to remember any details about his appearance, which I would have done had this happened to me now. When our eyes met, he asked me something along the lines of, "Have you got any weed?" At 15, I was a good kid and didn't have anything to do with smoking or alcohol, and certainly not drugs. I told him no, and continued to sit uncomfortable on the bench waiting for the bus. Then he gestured towards the bus schedule above the stairs to the platform and asked me, "Where are you headed?" As if him asking me about drugs wasn't a warning sign enough for me to not tell him where I was going, I obediently told him that I was catching the 123 bus to XYZ. Coincidentally, he responded with, "Oh, me too." I found this to be a bit unlikely, since it was a small town where the bus was headed, but it was still possible that he was actually headed that way. I started to get suspicious at this point, and I was already feeling very uncomfortable. I looked down at my phone in hopes that he wouldn't talk to me anymore. He noticed this and asked me what phone service I was with. I told him the service, and he said, "I've got a voucher for a phone credit for that service, but I can't use it because I'm with a different service. Do you want it?" I'm not sure if it's the same in the US, but in Australia where I live, we can buy prepaid credit to add call value onto our phone. I politely declined, assuming he had ill intentions but unsure of what benefit he would gain from giving me this voucher. In hindsight, maybe he was trying to get my phone number or something. I honestly don't know. He persisted. "Are you sure?" "Why not?" "I can't use it." But I declined again. "No, thank you." Things got weirder after that, when he pointed out my big platform shoes and asked, "Is it difficult to run in those shoes?" Creepy. I lied and said, "No, I can run very well in these." He could have asked if it was difficult to walk in them, but no, he didn't. He then gestured to the stairs down to the bus platform and suggested that we both go down there to wait for the bus. The platform is very poorly lit, and there was probably no one down there. I didn't want to be there alone with this person, so I told him that I was going to wait here, but that he could wait down there if he wanted to. As expected, he didn't move and remained on the bench with me. A few moments later, I noticed someone walking towards us through the bus station. Against all possible odds, it happened to be someone I recognized. It was my friend's older brother. He was probably about 17 at the time. "Ben!" I almost shouted when I saw him. He made his way over and stood in front of me on the bench. I asked him which bus he was catching, and luckily it was the same one as me. I was so relieved. We exchanged a few words back and forth, and eventually the creepy guy sitting next to me got up and wandered off. He hadn't said anything while Ben and I were talking. Ben and I went down to the platform and got on the bus when it arrived. Surprisingly, the creepy guy didn't get on the bus like he said he was. I told Ben about what had happened and how he had saved me. I can't imagine what would have unfolded if Ben had not showed up when he did. I would have gone down to the platform when the bus arrived, and hopefully he would not have done anything since there was someone driving the bus, a potential witness. If he had gotten as far as getting on the bus with me, I was worried about the 20-minute walk from my bus stop to my house. We're on a dark street surrounded by bush on one side, and I didn't have credit on my phone to call my mom and ask for a lift. So I need to start with a little background to set the scene. My girlfriend was going to college, and I was working in a different city. She went on a trip over spring break and was flying back into the United States. She told me that if I would pick her up, then she would get us a hotel away from her roommates and we could have a romantic night. So I was all for that. It was last second, so I was in a hurry trying to throw everything together in my book bag. Needless to say, in my haste, I forgot things that will play into the story later on. So I pick my girlfriend up and we go out for dinner. She is exhausted, so we head to the hotel. Eventually, after a while, it is time to go to bed. I took my contacts out and put them in the solution. My solution is acidic to take care of calcium buildup. I can't put my contacts back in for 6 hours or I'll get a chemical burn in my eyes. I realized I forgot my nasal spray, which I was using because my nose was stuffy. I complained about it to my girlfriend, and she told me she could go get it at Walmart if I wanted. I told her I would survive. It would just be a pain. I hopped in the shower afterwards. I got out of the shower and saw my girlfriend was gone, and so was the car fob. My car fob is also the key, so you drive with it. I was quite happy. I had the best girlfriend. She was doing that for me at 2 a.m. My phone starts ringing, and I get a frantic call from my girlfriend. The Walmart isn't open 24/7. The fob was now out of battery, and wouldn't unlock the door. She was alone in the parking lot with a drunk guy all the way across on the other side. She described the guy as tall, wearing too many layers of clothing, staggering and loudly talking to himself. He had a bottle in his hand. She was worried because the Walmart was quite secluded. It wasn't a great part of town either. It was off the highway and down the road about a mile, but that mile was all woods. I told her I would throw on my glasses and run to her since it was only about 2 miles from the hotel. I looked in my bag and realized I didn't have my glasses. I had forgotten them too, and I couldn't put in my contacts because of the solution. I was blind as a bat without one of those two things. But I couldn't leave my girlfriend, so I decided I would make do with limited vision. I took off as fast as I could and was tripping repeatedly over random things on the sidewalk. She is getting more frantic on the phone. The guy is making his way towards her. He is staggering back and forth. He is falling as he walks towards her. He is yelling incoherently towards her. She decides to run around to the other side of the Walmart building and hide. I'm beginning to panic because I'm worried maybe he is working with someone and they're back there. I finally get to the Walmart. I walk down the entry driveway and see my car sitting there. I can just make out a figure sitting on the hood. I jog across towards him and yell the most intimidating, "Hey, you there!" I unfortunately trip over a brick on the ground and almost fall. The man hops off the hood, and then it got more weird. He starts talking to me, and he isn't drunk at all. He's fairly well spoken. He asks me if I'm okay. He comments on me tripping and that I was currently squinting at him. He tells me that he locked himself out of his car, that he was waiting for someone. He wanted to know if I needed help. I tell him that's not true. That's my car. He says back, "Indeed. You know the girl that was with the car." I tell him that she is my girlfriend. She got locked out, and I don't appreciate him creeping her out. He says, "Locked out of the car? I'm sorry. Wish I could help." He proceeds to walk away from the parking lot towards the woods. He is walking slowly and calmly, like nothing was out of the normal. I run towards the building and yell to my girlfriend. She comes out from behind the building and we walk back towards the car. I start trying to get the fob to work and unlock the car. It just needs battery to unlock the car. It can drive it dead. I am contemplating trying to run back and call AAA in the morning when my girlfriend starts screaming and panicking. I look up and see the man sprinting out of the woods towards us. My girlfriend yells at me that he has something in his hand. I can't see, so I have no idea if it's a knife or something of that sort. I make a split-second decision and pick up the brick I tripped over. I bust out my window with it and unlock the car. I tried to brush out my seat and scramble in while my girlfriend scrambled in as well. I cranked the car and took off with the guy about 20 feet from the vehicle. I called the cops on the way back to the hotel. Most of you are probably thinking that I'm an idiot and should have done that earlier, but response time in that city is terrible. It would have been like 30 minutes, and my girlfriend was too terrified to let me get off the phone to call anyone. I stayed on the phone from that moment I started running until I was there. The cops never found the guy. I ended up with a busted-out window and a cut-up hand with glass in it from when I tried to brush the glass out of the seat. Overall, I was pretty happy that we both made it out without any significant harm coming to either one of us. When I was about 18, I worked as a nursing assistant on a surgical floor. we got a range of patients that varied from gallbladders to knee replacements. I worked with another assistant and we split the floor in half. She got one hallway and I got the other. She went on break, so I responded to the call lights in both halls. One of her patients rung out, so I went to help. The lady's son stepped out while I assisted her to the bedside commode. I came out and told him I was done and he could go back in. Instead, he chose to talk to me. We exchanged some small talk and he went back into the room when his mother called for him. The other assistant came back and I continued working. I went to chart at the nurse's station and the son came out and began chatting with me again. I didn't think much of it. It was the middle of the night. Nothing good was on TV at this time, and I assumed he was just bored. I got up to attend to my patients and he followed me, asking lots of questions. How old I was, if I was going to school, how long I had worked here. He even waited outside patients' rooms till I came out. I should have mentioned earlier that this guy did not have the usual creeper vibe. He was a clean-cut guy, perhaps in his late 20s. He was charming and funny. I guess his appearance delayed my creeper sense, and I dismissed his behavior as being socially awkward. He continued to follow me and talk to me, and I tried to drop subtle hints that I had a boyfriend, although I didn't. Towards the end of my shift, he became a little more aggressive. He told me, "Well, I guess I'll just have to kill him," referring to the boyfriend I spoke about. He said it with a laugh, and he told me he would walk me to my car when my shift was over. He left to check on his mother, and at this point I was creeped out. It was the end of my shift, and we gave report to the day shift assistants. I told my coworker what had happened with the son, so she checked the hallway before we left, and we took a little-known path to the parking garage. I went to bed when I got home, and at around noon the day shift charge nurse called me. She told me not to come in. She said the son had been asking about me. He asked when I worked, what my real name was. I put a nickname on my badge, and more personal info. When she wouldn't tell him, he asked other nurses. His mom was going home that day, she said, so I could probably come back tomorrow. Tomorrow came and my manager called. She told me to stay home the rest of the week. The son had sent flowers to the floor and had called every floor asking about me and when I worked. She said she didn't feel like it was safe for me to come back. Eventually he quit calling, and I came back to work. About 3 months later, I was watching the news. He had been arrested for rape and murder. When I was 14, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant I mainly spent my days on my own while my parents worked, watching TV and playing The Sims. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 a.m. until 5 p.m. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I liked to sit in the living room, my chair was next to the window anyway, so I could always see people on the street, and they could see me too, I guess. One day I was sitting watching daytime television when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street is a dead end, I normally recognized everyone who walks down it, but I had certainly never seen him before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper, with hood up and sleeves rolled up, revealing tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag and looked closely at each house as he passed. As I sat watching him, I was clearly in full view of him too. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and turned to come up our short drive. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I didn't know, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult, so I obediently went and opened the door a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I had said no. But instead, he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag. Well, the thing is, I've just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know. It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things. He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of his bag. The word prison made my heart skip, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closing the door. He stood on the step for a moment, still talking to me about being able to help. So I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did. I soon settled back down to watching the television and forgot all about my encounter. At 5 p.m. my parents came home and they took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mom answered. 2 police officers stood on the step. They asked if anyone had called at our house that day. My mom said no one had, and that was when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that actually someone had called. Seeing I was young, the 2 police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what had happened. Once I had told them what had happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and left. I was straight on at my parents asking what was going on. My mom explained that a few minutes after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. When he found her in the shower, he sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door when I'm home alone now. Through my bag for some gum, and I noticed someone sit down next to me on the bench. Usually when someone sits on a bench which is already occupied, they leave a sort of one-person gap between. But this person sat down right beside me, despite there being a whole bench available. When I looked up from my bag, I saw a man who was maybe 30 years old. I'm a terrible judge of age, so I'm not really sure. I don't remember too much about his appearance. I think he was bald or had... I live in a small town built in bushland, where a lot of elderly people reside, so it's safe to say that it's always been a safe neighborhood, and I've never needed to be overly cautious. This is probably why I had often been naive enough to believe that although there is a small possibility of something bad happening to me, I thought it was far too unlikely. At the time, I was 15 years old, and I used to go out on weekends to visit my boyfriend at the time, who lived quite a while away from me. Left my boyfriend's house and public transport was less frequent at that hour. It would be a waste of time for my boyfriend to travel any of the way back home with me, so every week I made the trip back home alone. On one particular night after visiting my boyfriend, it was the usual ride on the train back into the city, and I was waiting at the bus station. The bus station is a large open building above a number of platforms on a lower story where the buses would pull in. I was waiting on the upper story on a bench in front of the stairs that led to the platform I knew. I wasn't able to drive at this age, so public transport was my only means of going over to visit him. This meant walking about 20 minutes from my house to a bus stop, catching the bus into the city, and then catching a train to his house. I was used to doing the same trip every week, and I felt safe taking the trip by myself. As I was only able to see him one day during the week, I would leave early in the morning to get there and stay until fairly late enough before going home. Because it was late by the time I needed for my bus home, I don't recall there being many people around, maybe one or two people passing by, but it was essentially deserted because of the late hour. On a side note, because I was visiting my boyfriend, I dressed up to look pretty for him. I was wearing a decent casual dress. I had straightened my long hair so that it looked neat, and I had just recently received some high platform boots for my birthday, which I thought looked super cool, and they were fun to wear because I didn't feel so short. I was ruffling